Her father was abducted and kidnapped to Iran, where he's been imprisoned and sentenced to death. I'm Jonathan Sacerdoti. Giselle Sharman, thank you so much for joining me. Firstly, how are you doing?
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for having me. I'm hanging in there, fighting for 4 years, but continuing.
The story of your father is quite a shocking one, even to people who are aware of how the Islamic Republic works and operates. Tell me first off what happened to him, how he came to be kidnapped by the Islamic Republic.
My father is an outspoken critic of the Islamic regime in Iran. He was born in Iran, but he was raised in Germany. Our whole family grew up in Germany. And for the last 2 decades, we have lived in America, in Los Angeles, actually. So what he was doing, he is a software engineer, and he created a website for the people of Iran where they were able to talk about all the human rights violations and everything that is going on inside of the country, what the regime is doing to the people inside of the country, and bring it out. So this is decades ago, before we used social media in such a way to show really the truth. And the regime started targeting him, trying to get the website down. And when they couldn't do that, they started to target him and try to silence my father.
Your father, like you, is an American-German dual national, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you were based in America along with him. So how did it come to be that he was even able to be abducted by the Iranian regime?
So for the last 16 years, the regime tried one way or another to threaten him, to stop him from doing his activism. That's what we call the first step of the Islamic regime, trying to stop information from coming out, trying to stop activists from speaking out the truth. So there were death threats on him. And in 2009, they actually sent an assassin to Los Angeles to murder my father, to murder our family. And thankfully that was foiled. And the assassin went to jail here for a year only and was then released in what we believe was a prisoner exchange with the Islamic regime. The regime never stopped trying to silence my father. So the assassination plots and kidnapping plots were continuing. So my father was this whole time under threat of being abducted. In 2020, because he has a business, he has a software company, he took a short trip to what he believed was a short trip to India. It was, unfortunately, at that time, the pandemic hit and his flights were rerouted. He had a short flight overlay in Dubai, and that's where he called us from his hotel room in Dubai. And that was the last time we were able to see him free. After that, all contact broke up to my father, and we were able to follow his steps on his Google Maps. We had his Google tracker, and we saw how the regime was abducting him, taking him over the border to Oman, and then to the coast of Oman. And the very next day, the Islamic regime showed him on their public television, blindfolded, tortured, forced to confessions. And that was the moment that we found out they kidnapped my father. They kidnapped my father in the front of the eyes of the world and were parading it on their TV.
That's really very shocking. How did they even know about his travel plans and that his flight was diverted?
We don't know exactly how they found out. They have different ways of surveilling dissidents to see where they are, through people who pose as activists and get in contact with you. But also as a normal citizen, when you're traveling anywhere with your own passport and you swipe your passport at the borders, the border and that country and the system of that country, the intelligence knows that you're there. So we know that many countries' systems and have been compromised by the Islamic regime. We would like to find out the details, but the problem is none of my countries, neither Germany nor the US, have investigated what was really going on there. And this is not just horrific for my father, who needs justice, and these people have to be brought to justice who kidnapped him. It is also a threat to all of us who travel throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe, and we could be kidnapped and do the same way. So we have to really investigate and find out what was happening there.
And that is quite terrifying, because what it means is that the Iranian regime has really infiltrated all parts of the Western world, that even an American-German dual citizen, not two countries, not known for being weak, let's say, a dual national of those two countries can be nabbed whilst traveling, not even in Iran, and abducted back to Iran, imprisoned there in presumably quite horrible conditions, and now sentenced to death.
It is a pattern, Jonathan, that nobody speaks about. At the same time as my dad was abducted, a Swedish citizen was abducted through Turkey and taken to Iran. He was a hostage there for 3 years, just as my father, and he was executed last year because the Swedish citizen did not do anything to save him or bring him back or investigate. A French blogger, Rouhul Azam, was kidnapped a year before my dad from Iraq and taken to Iran. So there was a kidnapping plot on a Iranian journalist in New York to take her from there. These plots are so common in the diaspora, but nobody wants to talk about this pattern. Nobody wants to investigate and save us from this. And you lose your luggage in a country, and there's like a police report and investigations and stuff going on. But when a dissident, when a father is kidnapped, all of a sudden nobody wants to know what happened. And this shows you how much our governments are infiltrated and manipulated by these terrorist regimes.
British viewers will be aware of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, who is a very well-known person, dual British Iranian national who was abducted, but that was in Iran and imprisoned there for a very long time. Now, Britain went through various phases of negotiating and not negotiating until eventually she was actually released in return for the payment of a historic debt. I know that America has done deals with Iran, and that in fact the US released billions of dollars to Iran and did secure the release of some hostages. I know that your father wasn't one of those people. Why was Jimmy not included in that prisoner release?
That is the big questions that we're all asking. Why are hostages left behind? And more importantly, why is it that hostages or political prisoners who have been fighting against these terrorist regimes are never saved, are never rescued? They're always forgotten. They're always left there to be executed. That's just the biggest question that brings us really to the truth. First, I have to say, this hostage business, this hostage diplomacy has been going on for 45 years. The Islamic regime, when they came to power, they took the entire US embassy hostage. So this is nothing new. We have seen this over and over again. And the problem is, first of all, that we continue to negotiate for each and every hostage in an isolated case. That weakens us as Western countries. We would have much more leverage if we would come together with all of these countries. All the European countries have hostages in Iran, in Gaza, in other places. And we would have so much more leverage if we would form a task force that puts pressure on these regimes to release our hostages and to discourage further hostage taking. But we don't do that. We make individual deals for individual hostages, every time leaving people behind. Just on last Saturday, we witnessed how a mass murderer of the Islamic regime, who was sentenced to life in prison in Sweden, was released for a single hostage there. Other Swedish hostages, again, were left behind. Ahmad Reza Jalali is a Swedish hostage there for 8 years on death row. Habib Shab was left there and was executed. My father was left there and is at risk of execution. We have at least 19 other European hostages that are being held there, including British citizens who are still being held there. So continuing to do that is not going to make us safe. It is going to put a price tag on every single European and American and Australian and Canadian, especially when we travel, even to neighboring countries. Journalists that travel, activists that travel, need to go to conferences, are going to have a target on their back by these regimes because they know they can be taken and then released in some form of negotiation. So this whole thing has to stop.
In fact, what you're saying effectively is that what the Western governments are doing is not only not discouraging hostage taking, it's encouraging it because it's setting a price and it's showing just what can be achieved in release for even one or maybe very few hostages. And that only encourages more hostage taking. And I think it's also worth noting that even to people who don't have any links to Iran, there is still a massive risk from the regime that reaches far into the West, because if people like your family can be in danger and your father can be abducted in that way, people only need to imagine how the rest of our lives can be affected. There have been plots foiled within the UK against Iranians and non-Iranians that have been attempts to kill by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I think that it's worth people getting involved, even if they're not directly connected. It's not okay just to think, well, this is happening to other people. It's a sort of Iranian diaspora problem. Is that the case also, do you think, in America where you are?
Oh, absolutely, Joseph. This is the case all over the Western world right now. And we are not safe in our own countries. And that is the fault of our governments that lets these jihadist groups in here, that negotiates with them, that treats them as a business partner instead of understanding that these regimes are the biggest threat to national security all over the world. So you don't have to be a dissident. You don't have to be Iranian to be targeted by the regime. Asadullah Assadi, just to give one example, was an Iranian diplomat. He was not a diplomat, but he was called a diplomat. He was stationed in Austria, and he was plotting a terrorist attack in Paris. He was carrying a bomb through Germany, going to Paris. So if he was successful and he would have bombed the rally that he was wanting to bomb, there were coffee shops next door. There were politicians that were going there. There were normal citizens there that would have been dead right. These people don't care if you're an activist or not an activist. They target activists, but you will be implicated as well. And the problem is that we, first of all, we don't see the threat because we think the threat is somewhere else. It's in Iran, or if you are an activist or if you speak out. Second of all, even when we show the threat, when we show our governments, I am at risk. My dad was almost assassinated in the US. They don't do anything about it. They tell you as an activist, well, keep quiet. Don't go on rallies. Don't travel, like go into witness protection. What they're actually doing is emboldening the terrorists who want us to be quiet, and they're helping them, saying like, well, if you're at risk when you speak out, just don't speak out. But what does that mean? That means none of us can be free in our own countries anymore. They have their arms stretched out to Europe where they can tell us to be quiet. And this is horrific that we should have extra protection by our states when we are at risk, but the complete opposite is happening.
Now, you've been very critical of the US for not doing enough to protect you and not doing enough to help to get Jimmy back. What do you think they failed to do? What would you like to see them doing?
It's not just not doing enough to get him out or to save him. It's doing something to endanger him, First of all, when your national is kidnapped in front of the TV, like they were broadcasting that, right? What should be the reaction of a normal government? They should come out and first of all just condemn that. Our administration in the US, as well as the Germans, were quiet. They said nothing when he was kidnapped. They are quiet about all of these kidnappings and transnational repression and terrorism attempts. For 3 years, they were quiet. They did not talk to me, and I'm an American citizen. The State Department refused to meet me, refused to talk about my father, refused to acknowledge that he's been held hostage there until I staged a sit-in strike in the summer of 2023 in front of the State Department. And they finally spoke to me. And what they had to say was, Giselle, your dad is there. We understand that he was kidnapped. It's all horrific. We're getting some Americans back, but your dad is not one of them. Without an explanation. We're giving this regime that kidnapped your father, tried to kill you all, $6 billion. $6 billion. And when I asked, okay, you're leaving him there on death row. First of all, what you going to do after this $6 billion goes over there to get him out, pay more for my father afterwards? And second of all, what are you going to do about all of the future hostages that are going to be taken? And they said, what future hostage? Well, 2 weeks later, we had 250 new hostages taken by Hamas, which is funded by the Islamic regime, now in Gaza. So these future hostages, every time you deal with them, every time you embolden them, they don't stop their terror. They are emboldened to continue what has worked over and over again. So they did not just do nothing about my father. They put him in danger. They put more hostages and civilians at danger. They put the people of Iran in danger, and they made it practically impossible to get my father out and save him without paying massive amounts of money. And that's what the regime understood. And they did another sham trial and sentenced the US government and my father to pay $2.5 billion just for him, or they will execute my father. So here we are.
Wow. And in terms of the response you had from your country's government, the US, that's really shocking to hear that for 3 years they literally didn't talk to you about the situation. One always imagines that should such a surreal and horrific thing happen in our own lives, our governments are at least privately talking with us, doing everything they can. But you're telling me that they literally wouldn't acknowledge the situation.
They do talk to hostage families that bring out the right message. If your message as a hostage family, guided by the government, guided by your lawyers, is please negotiate with the terrorists to get my father, my mother, my son, my daughter, then they will meet with you. That's what we're doing with a lot of hostage families. Bring them on stage, show how horrific it is to be a hostage, which is correct, and tell the world that the only way to get them out is another deal, another negotiation, another way to appease these regimes. But if you have the daughter of a dissident and whose father has been fighting against that regime, bringing out the same message as her father, saying, no, you should come together to put pressure and end these governments and help the diaspora and protect us. They don't want you anywhere on TV. They don't want you anywhere near the White House. They don't want your message to be heard by the public, because they know when the public hears the truth, they understand the truth and they support the truth. And that's not what they like to happen. They like to continue treating these terror regimes as business partner, make business as usual, as they've done for 45 years, and pretend that they care about hostages, pretend that they care about human rights, when it's all about money and business in the end.
Did your father, working as he did as a dissident and creating this network, ever talk to you and your family about what to do if this ever happened?
Well, even my father and my family was very unaware of the power of the regime to kidnap you. So it was always just about like, what happens if I get assassinated? And what happens if you get assassinated? Continue our fight, right? Like continue to do what's right, even if it's scary, even if your life is in danger. Don't let fear stop you from doing the right thing. And that's what I did. But my father also, after he was almost assassinated in 2009, had an interview with CNN where they talked about the assassin. And the assassin was in jail for a year and then released. And again, like what we believe was a prisoner exchange. And my father on TV there said, well, like while it was not fair to him that his almost assassin was released, he also said, like, anytime you're negotiating with these governments, you are in a way cooperating with them and you are tolerating them. And this needs to stop. So his message is what I'm trying to continue, even though, of course, my father would benefit if I had said, like, please pay billions of dollars to get him back. And sometimes it is the last solution. Sometimes this is all that you can do to save a human life, especially when they're on death row. I understand that. But if we all got together when he was kidnapped and put pressure, he wouldn't even be on death row right now. The regime would have been not emboldened enough to know that they can torture him, hold him in solitary confinement, knock out his teeth, take away his Parkinson medication. They would have not feel safe to do all of this stuff. But because of the failure of our governments, they continued to kill him, even though they haven't put him like on a crane and hanged him in public. That's what they want to do. But they're slowly killing him during this process.
And just worth mentioning that is exactly the sentence they gave him, though sentencing is perhaps a charitable way of putting it. The court is not a real court. The judges aren't judges. Exactly. It's all part of their manipulation and psychological torture of you and him. That they sentenced him to be hung from a crane. This is a particular Iranian regime method of killing people. It's not even the kind of hanging that we might think of. It's a slow, painful death from a crane that drags someone up by the neck. So it's even that is sadistic to a degree that is unthinkable to many of us. Now, I'm sorry to sort of detail it like that, but I feel it's important that people understand what we're talking about when we're dealing with this regime. I want to know from you, tell me more about your father, about the man that you experienced growing up. And it sounds to me like he was a very brave person, is a very brave person. And he's instilled that, I can tell, in you because you're continuing his fight now, really to have him come home. But also, as you said, not just to deal with his situation, but to deal with the situation of hostage-taking, dissidents, and generally how the West should react to Iran. How was he as a man? How did he teach you these lessons?
My father is my role model. He is one of my best friends. He is the person that people around him would always go to when they had problems. He is an engineer, so engineers usually have a problem solving kind of way of thinking when they look at the world. So any situation, any problems, any horrific things that happened in my life, I could always go to him. And maybe he didn't have the solution, but he would help me to find a way, a strategy or solution out of it. And I admired that in him, and he learned that on his own. He was on his own feet since he was 14. He financed himself. He got himself through school, and he built his own company. He was the first, or one of the first, that built a Unicode. Unicode is a program that we put on our phone where you can write in different languages, in Hebrew and Farsi and like whatever. So the fact that we can do that is again to those brilliant minds that gave these things to us. So he was really, really brilliant in what he was able to do. And the website that he created was so secure for the people of Iran, protecting their IP addresses, doing it VPN based, so it would still hold up even though the regime would shut out the internet in Iran. So it was his skills that he used for the good, even though he didn't have to, like we were safe in Germany, we were safe in America, we had our right. He didn't have to do this for other people on the other side of the world, but he had always the sense of justice in him, like just because we were chosen or privileged to get a visa, to get out of the oppression, doesn't mean that we have to forget that it's going on there. Doesn't mean that we have to forget about the children over there, the women, everybody who was not that lucky to get out. So it was a lot of times that I was very jealous that my dad was spending so much time on the youth in Iran instead of me or my brother. And I told him, like, why are you doing that? You're putting us in danger. Why are you not supporting me? And he said, I've supported you until you grew up, and now I have to support my other children. So he always felt like a father figure for the kids in Iran. He called them his kids. And I understand that now. I understand these are like my brothers, my sisters, my fathers over there, because the story of my father, as horrific as it sounds, is not unique. This happens in Iran on a daily basis, where people are kidnapped from their homes, charged with whatever in a sham trial, and then executed. And these children over there of these fathers cannot speak up. They get murdered if they try to speak up. So I'm not doing it for my father only. I'm doing it for all of them who have the same story.
When was the last time you or your family heard from Jimmy?
A week after October 7th, my father was allowed a phone call, highly supervised phone call with my mother. Only he's not allowed to talk to me as a punishment for me speaking up, of course. And he sounded horrific. 3 years in solitary confinement is psychological torture, like not being able to go outside, being able to see the sun, fresh air, know what's going on in the world, that there was a revolution in Iran or what's going on in the Middle East right now. Not being able to know that your family is out there fighting for you. Only being able to speak to the people who want to torture you or want to murder you and tell you everybody has forgotten about you. Nobody knows your name. Nobody knows your story. Nobody's coming for you. Your governments don't care. That breaks you, over the years. And you could hear that in his voice. He could barely pronounce words anymore. Like, it takes all of your energy and everything away. And my dad is 69. He's not the youngest. He has Parkinson's. He wasn't feeling too well when he was here. So I'm worried that he's not even alive anymore, because we don't have a sign of life from him right now.
And you say this was a week after October the 7th. Do you think there was a connection to the horrific massacres in Israel, on which of course were backed by Iran, to the timing of that call?
Of course, it is always timed. I mean, the last time before that he was allowed to call was before the Biden administration did that horrific $6 billion deals. They're always sending out messages to us. It's always like politically motivated what they're doing. And it could have, of course, been a threat because the regime knows that I'm outspoken. The regime knows that I will talk about Hamas, about atrocities, how the connection between Hamas and the Islamic regime, and we Iranian dissidents, we are out there to shed the truth. So showing us that our dad is there, that he might die, is of course always pressure to say, like, be quiet, shut up, or something will happen to him. But again, my father taught me to do what's right, and that's what I've been doing since October 7th. Be louder and louder, and of course they punished us by not letting us even know if he's alive, but by not letting us know what is happening to him, and by threatening us that this could be the last phone call. He could be executed any moment.
Well, it seems that it's having the reverse effect, for what it's worth, on you, which is the more terrible this is, the more you speak out. And I must say that among the Iranian dissidents who I've had the honor of meeting, this is not unusual, because I think that you guys, generally speaking, understand what the stakes are, and many in the West just have no idea of the severity and importance of this, and that this is not just your fight, but it's all of our fights. So I think that it's very, very important that you're doing what you're doing. And just as we're coming to the close of the conversation, I want to make sure that more people do indeed know about you and your father, that people do know the name Jamshid Sharmad, and that they are doing whatever they can to help get him freed, but more importantly, to help to get the West to deal with these problems more seriously. And to that end, maybe you can tell me, this has become a full-time job for you. I know you were telling me that before this, you were actually a critical care nurse during COVID, which is another extraordinary and selfless activity and occupation. So much respect to you for that. But what is it you would like to see individuals doing, people who are watching this? How can they help in the fight for Jimmy and the fight for Iranians in general to overthrow this regime?
People can care about my father, can care about the people of Iran, and can come out because of that. But what I try to let people understand is, even if you don't care about me, you don't care about my father, you don't care about the people of Iran, the biggest threat that we have right now in the world is the terrorist regime, the jihadist regime that is occupying Iran, that is funding all of these terror organizations, that is killing people in the Middle East, American troops, everybody, that is aiming to come and kill us all and take us over, because that's the ultimate goal of a jihadist regime. They want a global caliphate. If we understand that our lives are a danger, and that the only way to get national security, global national security, is to get these regimes down, then we will understand how to. It will only be done if we help the people of Iran topple this regime. And they showed us for 2 years, being in the streets, being shot in the eyes, being raped and executed, that they mean business. They are not afraid of the regime. They're not afraid. They were in the streets for a year and willing to die for it. So it is in our own interest to understand that when we support the political prisoners, and we have thousands and thousands of them in the jails of Iran that are executed every 5 hours, if we want them as allies, we have to keep them alive. We have to advocate for their lives, for their protection. We have to stop executions in Iran. We have to get freedom fighters back. We have to protect the diaspora that is speaking out and bringing out the truth. We have to connect with each other, because we need each other. All of our communities, be it Syrian, be it Israelis, be it anywhere in the Middle East and beyond, we need each other to hold this world safe from people who want to destroy it. So that is my message out there. If you want to support me, I'm on social media, and we have a podcast, War and Freedom Inside Talks, on YouTube. We have Jamshid Sharmad on Instagram, and I'm under Giselle Sharmad on Twitter. Please follow us, because the regular media doesn't want to show what we have to say. So we need these small stages to be able to speak to each other.
Very much so. And again, huge respect to you for doing this, because, you know, the stakes are so high for all of us, but especially for you and your family. And it's really important to follow these things going on. As you said, it isn't really in the mainstream media. It isn't in most people's consciousness as a result. And so the more that we can do to get this out there, the more that we can do now that we have the power on the internet to spread the word, the more important it is. I've often heard Iran experts explain that the regime is rational in how it acts for an irrational aim. When we look at Iran, it's a theocratic dictatorial regime which has beliefs which hinge around fanatical versions of Islam, which involve apocalyptic chaos and death, to bring about a sort of messianic moment. And if you keep that in mind, everything else that they do then does seem rational, to do with kidnapping and terror and wars and funding proxies in the region and across the whole world to attack all of our safety, because their ultimate goal is an apocalypse. And that's effectively something I think that most people genuinely don't seem to understand, but it's not to overstate it. We're not the crazy ones for explaining it. We're explaining a very crazy regime. But it's important, I think, that people realize that, right?
Everything sounds crazy until you really experience it. And we can all learn from history. That's why we're doing our podcast and our Educate America platforms, where we're talking about history and what happened. So without going down a huge rabbit hole, after the Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, these Islamist movements, whether it's jihadist Sunni movements, like the Muslim Brotherhood, or jihadist Shia movements, which is the Islamic regime and its proxies, wanted to reestablish the power that they had, to rule. The ultimate goal is to have money and power, and that's all they care for. The indoctrination of their army, of their militias, of their people, is to have stupid people to fight their wars. But the people on top are not even that indoctrinated. All they want is puppets to fight their war, to be billionaires. All of these leaders of the Islamic regime are millionaires or billionaires. They have so much money that you can't even believe it. The leaders of Hezbollah, the leaders of Hamas are billionaires. They're not the ones fighting or killing people or doing something. They want to be safe. They send the indoctrinated masses that they brainwashed since childhood to do their dirty work. And they found out over the years that it really doesn't look too good when you put jihad on a flag and go forward. So what they created is these institutions and these puppet figures that look like, for example, a prime minister, or that look like a foreign minister that come to the UN and speak about human rights, that speak about the right to have nuclear arms or anything like that, the right to whatever. Like, they use everything that we think about involving humanitarian causes. They use that because we're gullible to that, because we're affected by that, to bring a propaganda message out and continue the jihad against us. They have found out that you cannot bring down the Western governments by attacking them. You can only bring them down by destroying them from the inside. So that's why they have created so many institutions in the West, think tanks, academia, media outlets, that brainwash our youth to speak for the jihadists and bring our system down from within. And it will take us hours to explain that, but that's what we're trying to do on our platforms, because it is unbelievable until you go into history and see it was done in Lebanon. It was done in Iran. Was not a jihadist country. We were a free, a liberal country going towards modernity, and they didn't want that. And that is the problem that we're trying to get out there to people, to see this is not conspiracy. This is happening to our people in our schools, in our media, and we need you to see this, because if we don't see it, they will win, and you will find out the hard way that it was true.
Absolutely. And it is happening. It's happening there in America. It's happening here in Britain. And the more light we can shed on this, the better, because this is a vital issue for everybody. So, Giselle, thank you again for speaking with me. And I will keep Jamshid constantly in my mind. And I hope that we can all contribute in some way towards helping to achieve his freedom, but also, of course, helping to the wider goal that we should all be much more aware to this threat that exists from Iran at the moment, and not just to those of you in the Iranian diaspora, but in fact to all of us. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.